Hello marketer, it's Ty here, bringing you another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. I'm delighted today to bring Chris Taylor back on the show. Chris was one of our early guests on episode 5, and we spoke about his not-for-profit marketing team at the Heart Foundation were punching above their weight to become a serial winner, including taking out the AdNews Marketing Team of the Year award back in 2020. Since that episode, Chris has left the Heart Foundation and joined an incredible organisation focused on addressing men's health, Movember, as their Chief Experience Officer. This is the first time Movember have employed a Chief XO, and Chris explains why he's been brought in and how he's reshaping and building a modern team to help this organisation have an even larger global impact. But the main purpose of this interview is to cover a critical topic, which is how to make the right impact in your first 90 days in a CMO or CXO role. Chris breaks down his strategy for success, including what he focuses on, how he goes about it, and what mistakes and pitfalls to avoid. From getting to know the team, to getting to know the executive and other key stakeholders in the organisation, through to understanding the markets and customers. Chris shares his inside tips on how to go about this the right way, even during times of lockdown. I particularly loved his tips about the brand panorama and getting your team to present back to you as a way for them to bring the research and insights to life, to openly debate what has worked and what hasn't. As always, if you hear something you like, but you're out running or at the gym, then don't worry, you don't need to hit pause and write your notes. Just head on over to our website, growthgenerators.io, head to our podcast section, look out for this episode and download the notes. Dylan on the team listens back to each episode, pulls out all the juicy tips and strategies and lays it all out for you in some well-crafted summary notes. Thanks, Dylan. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from leading CMOs and thought leaders about what it takes to create a high-performance marketing team. This podcast is brought to you by Growth Generators, a consulting firm that helps CMOs design and build modern marketing teams that drive growth. If you need help optimizing your marketing team, head to growthgenerators.io. Now, let's get on to the show.
Welcome, Chris Taylor, Chief Experience Officer at Movember, to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
Thanks, Ty. Good to be here.
Yeah, and I'm delighted to have you back on the show. I thoroughly enjoyed our first discussion back in episode 5 in December when you shared with us your incredible journey at the Heart Foundation, leading to win as the AdNews Marketing Team of the Year in 2020. I know prior to that, at Heart Foundation, got a stellar track record with roles at companies like Woolworths, Coca-Cola, Visa, OneTel, Goodman Group, and MasterCard. And now from heart health to men's health. Can you tell us what piqued your interest in this really important cause? And for the audience's benefit, can you tell us a little bit more about Movember?
Sure. Look, as I said, happy to be here and share again. The role at Movember was one that had come up earlier in the year, and I had finished at the Heart Foundation at the end of 2020 and was really just looking at some opportunities, and we're really thinking of back in the sort of corporate sector. So wasn't necessarily looking to stay within the not-for-profit world. And the opportunity to join a men's health movement came up. And to be honest, it was almost too good an opportunity to miss. I think that Movember's established itself as one of the rock star brands in Australia. It's seen as an innovator, and everybody, knows Movember and what it stands for. So that opportunity to essentially do a similar transformation that I'd done at the Heart Foundation had come up, and it's not often in your career you get the opportunity to almost do a similar in a relatively short space of time. So to me, it was an opportunity to do things better with the learnings under my belt. So I jumped at the opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. Sounds exciting. And yeah, I was surprised when you mentioned earlier the size and scale of Movember. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and look, I was surprised too. Like a lot of well-known brands in this space, people have heard of them. They don't necessarily know a lot about them. That was certainly true at the Heart Foundation. But for me, when I was researching the opportunity, I was very surprised that we operate in 23 countries and have offices, I think, in five or six cities around the world. So that certainly added a layer of complexity, but challenge to the role rather than just within the one market.
Yeah, fantastic. Can't wait to dig into some of those challenges today. Now, As we know, the average tenure of the CMO position is rather tenuous and short, with different reports placing it just under 3 years in Australia, as per 2020 State of the CMO report, and around 3.5 years in the US, according to studies by Korn Ferry and Spencer Stewart. So little time in the role, we're always looking to make a big impact, but it has to be done in the right way and in the right order. And I think the first 90 days is critical to this. And as it happens, you've been in your new role for just over 3 months. So what I'd love to focus on today is, first and foremost, what to do in your first 90 days in a new CMO or Chief Experience Officer role. They dig into what you've specifically been up to and how you're kind of going about building a modern marketing and CX team at Movember, noting that it's still early days, of course. And then to cap it off, I'd love to learn about your leadership lessons that kind of guide you as you move into these roles and how you lead. How does that sound?
Yeah, no problem. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, we'll start with maybe tell us a bit more about your remit as Chief Experience Officer. Is this a new role? Why was it created? And what are you there to do?
So, yeah, it was a newly created role. And I think that it was created obviously with history in mind. And I say that because Movember started in 2003 as a men's health movement. It may not have started that way, but it certainly has progressed that way. Like most good ideas, it started over a beer at the pub. Two close friends were really, I think they were talking about moustaches and how that really disappeared from fashion, given their history and their iconic status. So, and they joked about bringing it back. And I think one of them had been at the time raising money for breast cancer. I think they had a personal connection. And I think they joked about bringing back the moustache to fund men's health area. So from those humble beginnings, they launched it. There was 30 Mo Bros, as we call them, in the first year. I think it just, the idea caught on and it snowballed. I really think that the organisation is responsible for making facial hair generally cool again. As you can, amazingly, it's now spurred a movement that really is present in 23 markets. And I think they've raised something in the vicinity of close to $1 billion in that time towards men's health.
Amazing to see how far it's progressed. And I think they've broadened their remit a little bit, have they? I remember earlier days, was it more focused around kind of testicular cancer, and now is it broadened out to men's health and mental health, or has it always been quite broad?
No, I think they have broadened. So we cover mental health and suicide prevention, prostate cancer and testicular cancer. A lot of programs and investment with experts in those fields to really make a difference.
Fantastic. And then, okay, so getting into your first 90 days in the role then. So do you have a particular 90-day plan that you've used when taking on each new role, or does it really vary depending on the role you're taking on?
Look, I do, but that is very different today than it would have been a few years ago. And largely that's driven by the restrictions on COVID. And remote working has changed the way that you go about your first 90 days. And I really think that it slows you down as much as Zoom has revolutionized flexible working and has provided so many wonderful opportunities for people to balance work and life. I do think, though, it does restrict your ability to get to know a new organization. There's nothing like walking the halls, going to meetings where there may be, 6 people, and you interact with them, you can learn their names and a bit about them. Not only that, but you can pick up the cultural dynamics a lot easier. Whereas if you've got the Brady Bunch screen in front of you, you don't get the same nuances or the same sort of stories and understanding of how everyone sort of fits in together.
Yeah, absolutely. It does connect us, but it is such a barrier, isn't it? You just can't replace that. The senses that you get from being in the same room with people, picking up that dynamic and the energy between people, even just the vibe in the office as you walk in. You can't get that face-to-face. And like you say, team meeting on Zoom or Teams, people just aren't quite as present, or it's so hard to get that dynamic. So
no, absolutely. So it was, I'm going to say it was a good 6 weeks before I even went to the office.
All right, so can you tell us a bit more about what you're brought in to do as the new Chief Experience Officer?
Yeah, the organisation certainly started as a fundraiser. And interesting that I didn't know this, but initially the dollars they raised, they would donate to other charities within the men's health space. And so in some cases, the dollars that were given to those charities were the largest donations they'd ever received. So you can imagine that created quite a buzz in these cause areas. But I think as time progressed, they realised there were gaps in the market in terms of addressing some of the issues with men's health. So they embarked on developing their own programs and health programs within the space of mental health and suicide prevention, men's cancers, so prostate cancer and testicular cancer. And basically those parts of the organisation are the ones that really start to get the work done and push towards behaviour change. And there's an amazing depth of expertise in that area. But I think that that's something that a lot of the audiences don't necessarily know. They see Movember and they know Movember in terms of the fundraising side, but not so much the men's health program side. So with that in mind, my role was really brought on to deliver and enhance the connection with our audiences, to do two things. One is to promote those programs, to get as many people in the target audience through them and interacting and engaging with them as possible. But on the other hand, also showing those as really the reasons for people to participate in and men to participate in growing a Mo. It's almost like the virtuous circle of, if you're showing your impact, you'll raise more income. And if you raise more income, you can have more of an impact. So in a nutshell, that was really what the focus was. And it was my role encompasses audience insights, all of the traditional areas of marketing, user experience, loyalty, digital design, channel development, all of those sorts of things, to basically make sure that we have as much of an impact as possible with our key audiences.
Fantastic. Sounds exciting, and yeah, huge opportunity ahead. So with that in mind then, how did you approach your first 90 days? We talked about some of the difficulties doing that via Zoom and remote. Well, what did you do and how did you go about it?
The first period, because I was working remotely, was really just a lot of Zooms meeting people. But I suppose my strategy for that first 90 days is get to know the team, get to know the organisation, and then get to know the audiences. Not always in that order, but it certainly was getting to know the team initially, knowing that the announcement of my role was leading to some immediate internal organisational structural changes. So I was brought on as the Chief Experience Officer, and the function I lead was combining existing marketing team, the insights team and the innovations team into one called the Movember Experience Team, or as we like to call it, the MET. And so the concept of the MET was a new one. And so immediately with my arrival, it was pretty much straight into transition mode. And I needed to very quickly get to know my team, their strengths, potentially where any gaps existed. I needed to get to know the organisation in terms of the marketing and the insights team and how they work with other parts of the organisation. And then at the same time, learn as much as I can about the audiences with which we serve. And that in itself is a huge challenge. And I'll be able to say I can fully understand that for some time, because when you're talking about the different we talk about our 4 key markets, and that's Australia, the UK, the US, and Canada. You're talking about a lot of difference in terms of the actual cause areas, but also differences in terms of health literacy, differences in terms of structure within the health industries and programs that are available over there, and also cultural diversity. So very complex to try and get to know. So I'm not even going to pretend that I'm even scratching the surface of that yet.
No. And even within each of those markets, they're so diverse, aren't they? Such large territories, and I'm sure, things differ from one coast to the other in the US, for example. Then break it down for me even further then. So we've talked about getting to know the team, the organisation and the audiences. What about your first day, first week and first month? Did you think about that? Like, what am I in for on this first day? What do I want to get done on the first week, and what's my goal for the first month?
I may not have been that specific, but I certainly did set myself the goal of spending half an hour with every member of the new MET team. And so you're talking around about 50 people. And it's very difficult, I think, to develop the new structure within that team, because it did need to be restructured, Very difficult to do that if you haven't met or spoken to a lot of the team. While you may have some ideas, and I've certainly in my career certainly borrowed the broad foundations of effective marketing structures from my time at Woolworths, and I implemented that at the Heart Foundation. But you don't want to predispose whether that can effectively work in a new environment, and particularly one that operates across time zones and across markets and across different cities. And a lot of my team were located all over the world. It was no mean feat doing those introductory meetings. And I think I've done most of them, but they were important because I really wanted, first of all, try and get to know everyone on a personal level, which is one thing in terms of being able to develop an effective working culture. But the second is really understand what they believed works well and potentially what doesn't work so well. And it's really interesting having those conversations one-on-one because, again, maybe this is the benefit of Zoom. If you had those meetings in ordinary circumstances, you'd probably have teams and meet with individual teams where they may not be so encouraged to make suggestions or observations. So it was that was essentially the goal from that. And the input from all of those members of the team certainly helped to inform the structure within the Met, which was recently announced.
Yeah, so important. There's obviously a bit of apprehension and nervousness perhaps from those team members knowing that a new structure is coming, not quite sure how it's going to work, knowing who you are, what you stand for, what your leadership is like. So yeah, such a smart move just to spend that time to get to know them personally and then understand what their strengths are and get their insights on what's working and what isn't. Because I think, like you say, you can't always predispose what you've seen work before. Structures need to be appropriate for the organisation, their level of maturity, where they're at and where they're heading. I think understanding and getting the input from the ground up is so important.
And look, just further to that, I think everyone recognised that the opportunity was to better utilise our data, better utilise our programs to connect with our audiences. And so I think there was certainly a lot of support for the move. It wasn't one that was greeted with, from what I could see, any real, fear or trepidation. But that doesn't mean that people who are part of that and across the organisation don't feel certain anxiety around change generally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's natural. So getting to know the organisation then, how did you go about that in terms of either CEO and exec team members and, like you said, how your team was engaging with the rest of the business?
Well, fortunately, we have a financial year that starts in April, I think it is.
Okay.
That meant that my initial period was through the planning phase. And so there was a lot of executive leadership meetings and planning sessions. So through that process, I was able to really get to know my colleagues and get to know them and actually spend time in a room with them too, which ended up drying up being here in Melbourne. So transitioned backwards. And that was great, getting to understand the dynamic and the history and the different roles of their teams. Face-to-face environment was certainly helpful. And from there, it was really spending as much time with their teams as possible and trying to understand not just what they do, but the way that they do it. And I think that it was probably evident from the early days, like any organisation, that you do get silos. And I think one of the tenets or the ultimate aims of structure, restructure and developing a lean team is reducing silos. So that was essentially one of the main things, is to understand how all of those teams work and operate.
Yeah, fantastic. And then lastly, getting to know the audiences. So I imagine you've spent a bit of time with your audience team, and how else have you gone about trying to unpack those big markets and get your head around some of the insights that you've got and what you don't have, and what the roadmap is or what else you need to learn? To
be honest, there's no shortage as you join a new organisation of being given strategy documents or recent reports. And so I tried to review a lot of those. Some of them can sometimes be a little bit out of date, as soon as they're written, but I tried to absorb those reading through them. But what I found more effective is for the team to bring them to life for me, because by doing that, you can understand the team dynamic, you can understand the roles people have played in developing a particular strategy or the role they play in a campaign and the results. But also you do get a divergence of opinions. And it's actually quite important, I think, to hear the sort of comment that was, look, we did it this way, but look, I didn't necessarily agree with that. You do start to stitch together and understand potentially why things have evolved the way they have. So moreover, I'm a very slow reader, I have to admit. So having the team bring those sorts of the evidence base to life for me has I think always been quite effective, because then you can also look at the creative and the assets that were created, so you can really get in and understand what's happened in the recent past.
I love that. So is that like just asking your team members to present on some of the strategic documents they've created, whether it be previous campaigns or audience insights, personas, journey maps, whatever it is, come and share that with you, almost a group presentation, or at least have a discussion and talk that through? Is that how you do it? Or
No, exactly. But often I'll give them a challenge and say, when it came to the creative services and the brand team, it was, look, I'd love to see how Movember shows up in the marketplace. And so I'd set them the challenge of pulling together an overview of all of the work that we'd done over the last 12 months. And we got into a room full of the team and just basically went through it. So we watched the videos, we looked at the ads, we critiqued things. I was able to ask the dumb questions. And it just really provided, I would say, a good audience perspective of how Movember presents itself. And I think by doing that, it's actually a good opportunity for everyone to see it, at least see inconsistencies or see better ways of doing things. Particularly as a brand, we want to push the boundaries on bravery. We've got to make an impact, and you've got to resonate with the target audience. I'd never be accused of being essentially wallpaper. We don't have the funds to allow our creative not to be effective. So it's just a good way, I think, to energize the team to know and look at what we've done and look at how we can do it better.
Yeah, I love that. Like a showcase and a retro in one.
Wow, there's been a lot covered in this interview so far. As a marketing leader, we know you like to spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. So we've got you covered. We packaged up all the tips, strategies, and resources from each episode into some beautifully crafted notes just for you. Not ugly AI-generated transcripts, but real notes taken by a real person on our team. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs. Now, back to the show.
Brilliant then. So any other last thoughts, things that you focused on in your first 90 days, whether it be around tech or culture or agencies or processes that you want to touch on before we get into changes to the team and how you're building that out?
I suppose in one way I'm going on a similar journey to our CIO, who joined a couple of weeks after me. So he's the new head of essentially technology. So we're able to sort of learn together, and I suppose ask the dumb questions together and try and get under the skin of the way things operate and worked on the way forward. So that was probably having a good partner in crime there. But in terms of agencies, all of that's still very much to come. I think we work with different agencies in different markets. So that'll come as we build the internal team and resources.
Yeah, love it. Lastly, it's a tough question. I don't know if you've got an answer for it yet, and especially with COVID and some of the difficulties of doing this via Zoom. But what have you found is effective to get a sense of the culture of the team? Like the mood, the level of engagement? Like, is there a staff engagement, or is there anything working with the people and culture team, or any tricks up your sleeve to get a sense of that? Or was it just through the one-to-one meetings?
I think that there certainly is staff engagement. Difficult, I think, to put that into any perspective when the teams themselves are now forming one bigger team. And so, but a very good understanding of the general engagement, which for an organisation like us, as you can imagine, is very high. But really, not long after I started, I needed to start to put together the structure, and there's a change journey there that you have to embark on. And I think that through that process, when there is change, it does give you a very good understanding of the cultural base of the organisation. So I suppose when things are in a period of potential instability, that's when the true culture can come out. rather than joining and it's great, new things are happening, even though that's not far away, may not be the best time to judge the culture. So I think just generally, I was able to take that on board through all the one-on-one meetings, but also listening to everyone as we sort of went on that change journey.
Yeah. It's so important being sensitive to that and understanding, I guess, the Kubler-Ross change curve and the fact that some people will be in that state of fear and anxiety about it, before they get through the dip and become more positive and excited about it.
Exactly.
Lastly, on the 90-day plan, what should leaders try to avoid doing, or have you ever made mistakes in those first 90 days?
Look, I think that it's presumptions and assuming that you know before you have the opportunity to really learn. I think as marketers, and it's interesting with that sort of 3-year stat in terms of the average period for a CMO, there's a natural tendency to get in and change immediately, restructure, change agencies, out with the old, in with the new. I think in my case, there wasn't necessarily that. Certainly my role or my team didn't necessarily exist in the form that it will. So I think it was really important that I slow down and really try and understand before making decisions as much as possible. You can never have all of the information when it comes to the complexities of an organisation, but certainly try and absorb as much as you possibly can. The other thing I think from a leadership point of view is when you work for an organisation like Woolworths, you are constantly in awe of the volume of things that are happening across the supermarket, and something that my wife will know only too well now. It's almost impossible to be across everything. So for me, it's being comfortable with what you don't know and trusting the fact that there are members of the team with skills and experience and expertise that you don't have, and accepting the fact that they're a valuable part of the team and that you don't need to replicate those skills. So sometimes it's really just being comfortable with what you don't know, knowing that you can't absorb or be across everything. I think if you tried to be, you'd be a very challenging leader to work for.
Yeah. Love that. And I think Louise Ayres on a recent episode talked about that analogy, which I think was in a Deloitte or one of those reports, talking about being the conductor. You don't need to know how to play every instrument, but you need to conduct the orchestra and get the best from each of your players, being comfortable kind of in that role rather than the expert on every instrument, which I kind of liked.
And that's not a comfortable space for a lot of people. And sometimes, we all find that challenging because you feel as though you should know this. But there's certain parts of marketing that I think have just raced forward over the last part of my career. And when I started, there's part of what we traditionally call marketing now that just didn't exist. So you welcome the fact that the digital natives in the team can get in and unpack a lot of that sort of stuff. And, with all the right guidance and support, collectively, you can have a greater impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, switching gears now then in terms of how you're building that modern marketing team. So you mentioned you brought together, I think it was marketing insights and innovation. What sits beneath that, or how have you recently restructured that further still?
So essentially what the sort of organisation I arrived to was very much used to smaller end-to-end marketing teams operating independently. They're not entirely independently, but being responsible for the marketing of one part of the business or one area of the business. Look, if you've ever worked in banks or large organisations, they go through these continuous cycles of the supermarkets as well, having teams allocated to business units and operating separately, or having a central marketing team. With that in mind, I can certainly see the benefits of what I'd call, I wouldn't say it's a centralized marketing team. That conjures up all sorts of images of a head office. But what I'm talking about is a specialized marketing team or a specialized experience team. So that is making sure that the entire Met is focused on delivering the organizational priorities and challenges, and that collectively we're able to add a lot more value and be part of the entire delivery chain rather than a smaller team trying to do everything themselves. I think marketing and generally has progressed from all-rounders to who are used to doing a lot of everything to actually becoming a lot more specialist in what we do. And some of the examples I gave before speak to that. You need specialists that understand the strategies and how to optimize certain channels. You need specialists that can bring them all together in really engaging journeys. And so that's essentially what we've done here. And I really was mindful of utilizing the resources we have all over the world and bringing them into this one specialized team format. So what we've ended up with is 6 key focus areas across the Met. The first is brand and content, and that area leads the delivery of our brand and content strategies and are responsible for creation of creative and the execution of that, of the creative and the content. And within there, we have our creative services team, which is like our in-house agency. The second is public affairs and comms. So that team's responsible for the strategy and messaging framework and supporting our advocacy efforts and push for earned media, cohesive way, and also managing talent and influencers. The third is the campaign area, and campaigns does have a different connotation at Movember, and something that I've been reminded of when we talk about when campaigns or campaign is talked about in Movember, they mean the Movember campaign that happens that 1 month of the year, whereas we're moreover operating 12 months of the year in terms of raising money and promoting our health causes. So that campaign team is very much the strategic focus and strategic partnership area, with campaign directors being deep partners with each business unit. And then they basically steward the work and the requirements and a strategic response across the entire Met. The next one was the digital and direct channels. So that area leads our transformation of our digital presence, our customer experience. So within there, you've got channel strategists, but also the deep experts and owners of our channels, from email to website to apps to search, who are really working to generate leads and optimize our engagement, through the funnel. The fifth one, data and insights, and that's really focusing not on reporting and not on just developing dashboards, but really the actionable insights from our data and making sure that we've got a data strategy in place so that we're capturing as much information as we can to basically inform all of the other decisions that we make. And the last one is innovations. And that team is basically there to develop engagement and opportunities with new audiences or new ways to raise money from maybe non-traditional areas. And in the past, had some great wins, that team, in terms of connecting us with new partners or new ideas that have generated, income or extended our reach.
Yeah. Wow. Sounds awesome. I love that. Love that structure, and it makes total sense from the brand and campaign, public affairs, campaigns and data-driven. So I think those business partner roles are critical. The campaign directors, sometimes the weakness when you go fully specialised or centralised is you lose that connection to the business areas, or they feel like they're not getting enough love. So having the right people in those roles to connect with those business partners is critical. The innovation team sounds really interesting. That and the digital one. Just interested around the CX piece. So is that kind of shared between the innovation, data and insights and the digital, or where does the CX function live in terms of experience design?
The CX, the CX and UX team will ultimately live in the digital and direct channels team. And those roles are critical because it's really not just, for me, it's not just about the experience of a particular product, but it's the entire, having an influence on the entire end-to-end journey of getting people to engage with the product. Certainly helping to know that it exists is the first thing, but getting to engage with it. And then a lot of the products that we have live are all about opportunities to go back and find out more information. I mean, a lot of the time your audience are going through great change and often great stress moments in their life. So it's not about coming once and finding out what you need. It's the sort of place that you go back to again and again to find out more and more information. So it's really important that we create the journeys that bring people more information, provides information to them in bite-sized pieces, and keeps a long engagement with not just the area that they need help with, but Movember as an organisation.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can imagine in that innovation team, you're already thinking about some of the calculators and tools and things that you implemented at Heart Foundation, not necessarily saying it'll be the same, but I imagine that team really thinks about those new interactive different ways to drive engagement as well as the new products and audience segments. Is that right?
Look, I think that generally those sorts of innovation tools and ideas can come from anywhere. And it's certainly we're always encouraged to do that. And the experience with the Heart Foundation is a great springboard for digital health products and the role that they can play in really providing that self-service, self-help to men at times when they're, as I said, in periods of great stress. And let's face it, we're talking about some things here that men just don't talk about. You're talking about prostate cancer and all of the implications in terms of sexual dysfunction that come with that. Not the sort of thing that men generally would openly want to talk about. And then when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention, again, men famously very bad at talking about those things, which is why there's some horrible statistics that a man takes his life every minute of every day around the world. And it's actually suicide is the biggest killer of men under 40. Is simply horrifying. So it's really about making sure that we're providing the sort of support that they can comfortably interact with. And you do that by providing, really good experiences, easy to use, easy to understand, intuitive, keeps the audience member, engaged. And the more engaged they are, the more they'll open up, the more they'll learn, and hopefully the more we can deliver healthier, happier lives for them.
Such important work that your team and Movember is doing. And Chris, conscious of time, we are right up against it. Just wondering if you've got 1 minute for our Fast Five. We can see if they've changed since the first time. Are you ready?
I guess I am.
So what do you think are 3 essential capabilities or criteria of a high-performance marketing team?
I think it's specialization, role clarity, and a great culture of support and ultimately enjoyment.
And how would you describe your team's culture in one word?
At the moment, I'd say optimistic.
Yeah.
We're going through change, and I think that's going to lead to good things for everyone.
What's one metric you've successfully used to track and measure team performance?
I'm a fan of the 360 feedback. That's something that quite often it's senior leaders that do it. But I think that getting a good feedback loop from other parts of the business about the team that you manage is probably more important than acquisition targets and budgets and a lot of those things which ultimately are shared metrics. I don't think you can really beat having the opinion on the team with those who we work with.
Yeah, and it's such a powerful development tool for those individuals as well, isn't it? To get that feedback almost unfiltered. And what is one skill or capability you've learned recently you wish you developed much sooner in your career?
Patience. Look, also understanding leadership isn't taught. You pick it up. You learn from people who do it well, try and replicate some of that yourself. But I really think that as a leader, it's about outcomes collectively and not about ownership. I think we all have those moments in our career where we think we should own something in particular. And those are the things that wake you up in the middle of the night. And ultimately, I think letting go of that and thinking about organizational outcomes makes you a better leader and provides the sort of support and culture that you want to build.
Insightful. And what book or books have you read that you found yourself recommending to others?
How Brands Grow is a classic, and I think a very good foundational one, but also the long and the short of it. Not a book, it's an essay, but the long and the short of it, I think, does give a great understanding of the need to think long-term and build brands as well as do short-term activations. So those two I'd highly recommend.
Yeah. Fantastic, Chris. Well, thank you so much for being our first guest to come back on the show twice. You have delivered once again. I loved hearing all your tips and tricks for the first 90 days, which is so important, especially in CMOs, to have that impact, but not to rush things and to take your time and do that discovery and get to know your team and build trust. And I think the way you broke that down with kind of the team, the organization, and to the audience was really great. And then thanks for being so generous in sharing how you're going about building a modern team. I think laying out the way you've structured your team is, again, quite quite an innovative model that makes sense, that specialized kind of functions and utilizing the skills within the team, but also having the right conduits with those kind of campaign business partners as a critical role and piece of that as well. So thanks again so much for your time.
No, thanks, Ty. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes. If you love the show, please remember to hit subscribe so that you can discover more tips and strategies to build a high-performance marketing team. And if you're feeling generous, please tell someone about the show who you think would benefit. We're on a mission to help CMOs build their dream team and enable marketers to do their best work. And we appreciate your help in spreading the word.